Kia ora. I hope everyone's had the opportunity to have some lunch, and we need to resume. I'm mindful that there are a number of members that have to leave us early today, and I don't want to be without a quorum. So I would ask us all to be as succinct as we possibly can. We welcome now the Waitemata Harbour Connections agenda item, and I would ask if all members are present. They're coming. I want to give Member Brown just acknowledge that the conflict that was declared at the beginning of the item, and thank him for drawing that to my attention. So thank you for that, Billy. Could we commence, please, in terms of the officer's report?
Good afternoon, councillors. Before I begin, I would first like to withdraw the statement in my report that Auckland Transport does not support the recommended option. I note that Auckland Transport has not determined its position in relation to the recommended option, and I do apologise for not making that clear. I'm here today to discuss the draft indicative business case recommended option, which is due to be considered by the Waka Kotahi NZTA board in February next year. And I think, Lauti, you're going to put the map showing the recommended option up on the screen. So, as a partner to the project, council staff have been working with the Waitemata Harbour Connection, or WHC team, in the development of options, which has culminated in the recommended option. And I'll just take you quickly through what that involves. It involves in stage 1, upgrading the northern busway stations and constructing an active mode path between Constellation Drive and Aokuranga Drive, 2 road tunnels between Central Motorway Junction and Aokuranga Drive, the raising of State Highway 1 between Auckland Harbour Bridge and Aokuranga Drive, continuous bus lanes between Aokuranga Station and City Centre, and active modes path from West Haven to Constellation Drive following the completion of the road tunnels. And in stage 2, construction of new light rail tunnels from Wynyard Quarter to Albany. In working through the development of the options, staff have identified a number of issues about the recommended option, which were discussed at the workshop, the Transport and Infrastructure workshop last month. These relate in particular to the affordability and value for money issue. At 56 billion, it is equivalent to more than double the government's total 10-year investment in Auckland's transport system. There would be a very long wait for active and PT crossings. As I note, the active modes only are constructed after the completion of the road tunnel. There's only marginal improvements in mode shift, VKT, emissions, but there are high embodied carbon in tunnels, and negligible land use opportunities are unlocked. There's also a lack of integration with the Auckland Integrated Transport Plan. So for these reasons and those outlined in the paper, council staff are recommending that the committee does not support the recommended option. There are, however, early project improvements which could be progressed by the government, which include the northern busway enhancements, the State Highway 1 cycleway, and targeted active mode improvements to better connect people to bus stations and ferries. and we have recommended that the committee supports these early improvement works. In addition, Waka Kotahi is currently investigating lower cost alternatives in response to the issues that have been raised by partners, and it responds to Council's request earlier this year that Waka Kotahi investigate more affordable options. And staff are working with Waka Kotahi on the lower cost alternatives and will update the committee when this work is complete. That was all that I was going to say today, so just happy to take questions.
Thank you. First question, Member Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, just for clarity, I do have an interest in this as I sit on the board for the Alliance Harbour Crossing. But I do have a question more around process and information flow. So being intimately sort of aware of the work that's gone into this draft IBC, and it's sort of been decades in the making, an enormous amount of time and energy has been spent coming up with a solution for Aucklanders and visitors to cross the Waitemata Harbour safely and in a timely manner. With a project this important and potentially transformational for our city, do you think the interaction and engagement between the Waitemata Harbour Crossing governors and management who produced the draft IBC with the likes of AT, Waka Kotahi, council governors and decision makers has been, I guess, robust enough to adequately and properly inform and clarify why the preferred option was chosen and the benefits this option presents? So what I'm sort of alluding to is we sort of know how these things work. They go through, down and up. And I guess just with the importance and the fiscal responsibilities, do you think that the governors from each side, if you like, have had enough engagement to cut through, if you like, to the IBC and why it's been framed like it has? Does that make sense?
Thank you, Member Brown, and I see that Megan has just come up to the table, and as the council representative on the partner steering group, I'll pass over to Megan.
Kia ora, Member Brown. Thanks, Elise. Appreciate your question. Through you, Madam Chair. One of the issues here with this project is that at a governance level, Council has had no involvement whatsoever. So this is a government-led project, and so there is no decision-making around this table. We have, the Waka Kotahi team and group have come, I think, once for a workshop, and we've had a couple to keep this committee informed. But there is no governance role for the council. As staff, we have been inputting with AT and us, but that's a concern that this committee has had all the way through.
Okay, just a little bit further. I understand that. I think the level of support or not is important though, and does have ramifications. So what I'm asking, I guess, is that being quite new to the TIC and being a part of the project, I actually haven't seen any interaction between those two parts of it. It goes down and it comes up, and what I hope doesn't happen is that the natural biases and tendencies we have as people aren't being added to the facts and rationale of why the option was picked, because what we can do is we can present it as a cup half full or a cup half empty. And I think the way to get around that is that at opportune moments, as we say mana to mana, those two parts of this machine, say the governors of the WHC and the council, actually get to interact with each other, ask some of the hard questions and go to the source.
Kia ora, Member Brown. I think there were a couple of occasions, where that occurred, but again, the process and the way that the governance was structured meant that wasn't done in the way that we would probably typically take through projects, certainly if council was leading it. There is no intention to be unnecessarily or biasly negative or positive, actually, on the project from the staff's perspective. There are some real concerns that we've raised, and that was raised in a letter from the chair of this committee earlier in the year, about July, I think it was. Lisa's going to nod at me. And so we've taken that, and for the purpose of at least having some reference to council's views for the Waka Kotahi board, which we understand will be in February, this is the purpose of doing that. That does not mean that should this project continue under the government in whatever guise, that we can't find a better way to work it through kind of from now on, which I think is where we're more interested in, I suspect, rather than the current, than kind of into the future. But I appreciate your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that.
Anything further? Mayor Brown.
Thank you for this presentation. I commend you, and I totally support the recommendation that we don't support the Waikato Harbour connections. And in response to Member Brown's thing, we have had no governments involved, so that when it was presented as a partnership, it's not really been a partnership. A partnership is a partnership. It's not just being told months later that you've gone and done something mad. $56 billion is like 5 years of Fonterra to disappear in a tunnel to go underneath the harbour. It's in the size of our economy. It's a wonder that grown-up people who can feed themselves and walk could come up with such a stupid number. It completely dominated. There was no possible way that could meet a benefit cost of even as low as 1. They'd probably be struggling to beat 0.01. And I look at all the way through. I don't know how these people made these choices. As I say, our grandfathers knew that tunnels were way more expensive than bridges. And even raising a highway between Auckland Harbour and Bridgeneck-Oranga to protect against sea level rising. There are so many simpler ways of doing that. You know, a cheap wall along the coast there, we're only talking about a metre, and a pump. We need to have some Dutch people involved in these decisions. The airport at Schiphol Airport at Amsterdam, which is one of the busiest in the world, is 14 metres below sea level. I'm shocked that people have come up with this. I truly am. And I'm shocked that it actually hasn't yet been dumped by the government. Compared with the involvement that we had with ALR, where we were actually sponsors, and it went off course a bit, but we were the sponsors, my fellow, I think it was Councillor Darby and Paul Majuri and a couple of others there, we really did, we were dragging them back out of the ground to look at the surface. I think but Waikato Harbour connections in Auckland Light Rail have done a disservice to planning of transport for many years to come. And I want to know, what could we have done earlier to have made this less ridiculous?
Lisa.
I'm not sure what we could have done earlier. Obviously, it's a Waka Kotahi project, and we are a partner to that insofar as staff were involved. We have raised issues through the process, which were discussed at the Transport and Infrastructure workshop in June, and there was the letter written by the chair of the Transport Committee raising those issues, but the work continued.
Well, yeah, I was at that meeting where they arrived and said this was a partnership. We had to say, no, it's not been a partnership at all. It's in partnership in the same way as the guy owned the cotton fields in partnership with the people who picked the cotton. All right, well, I think you've done a very good report here, and I'll be horrified if we don't support this. I'm quite happy to move it, actually. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll second the Mayor's moving of the resolution, of the recommendations.
I have accepted the motion to move it from the Mayor and Councillor Darby to second it. I have a question from Member Brown.
Thank you. And I guess this is quite a good example of a potential disconnect, because the crossing itself isn't $50 million. It's less than half of that. So I think as we tease through the detail for those that haven't been privy to the case, the draft case now, these sorts of comments are off the mark, because the higher figure of about 30 billion is actually for the light rail tunnel that goes up to Albany. Now, I would just think that if we could have these questions asked and at the source with all the work and mahi that's been done to be able to answer them, there might be a better understanding of how we came to this conclusion. And that's what I'm afraid of, that there's enough white noise, if you like, and probably a terrible term, that we're hanging our decision-making on figures that are being thrown around that don't justify actually what that's paying for. Because if it was simply a harbour crossing, it's less than half that cost.
Member Brown, we're sort of steering into an area of debate when we're still on questions. Could you pose a question?
So my question would be, is there an opportunity before the Waka Kotahi Board look at the draft IBC for the governors here to interact with the team that produced this IBC?
Who is best placed to answer that question? Megan's coming, I think.
Kia ora, Member Brown, through the chair. I don't believe there is any time before the February Waka Kotahi report. That's just one milestone, though. If we were talking a bit more broadly, if this committee did want to hear from the Waka Kotahi team, then of course we could arrange that for, I guess, February when the committee comes back. I'm not aware that there'd be anything before that, but in the hands of the chair on that, if Madam Chair did want something earlier than that.
With great respect, we are not in a position at this stage in the calendar to be able to schedule anything further, but we welcome the fact that you have drawn that to our attention. Thank you very much for that. Councillor Newman.
Good afternoon. This report is very interesting. I wondered, and you might not be able to tell me, but I'm just curious that you might be able to shed some light. How much money has been spent to date to prepare the options, the research, the analytics, the consideration of the issues relating to form, transport, development? What is the actual cost to the New Zealand taxpayer so far of this exercise that you are aware of, if you have any knowledge of that?
You're correct. I'm afraid I don't have the cost, the figures for that.
When could you get the information on that? I mean, I think that the New Zealand taxpayers would be interested to know how much this exercise has cost to date. because I think that the figure is probably going to be quite material. Probably, yeah. When could you find out?
I'll certainly make very quick inquiries, and I can bring that information back.
And do you have any sort of assessment of the? Well, I don't know. I mean, it's not your project. I accept you're the sponsor, but I mean, as a acquiring agency, I'm just wondering if Auckland Transport might have any back of napkin as to how much you think just a notice of requirement costs might be for any of the options that we're talking about. For stage 1 and stage 2. Any concept, any sense of what that cost may be?
Well, these are national scale projects. There would be many millions and millions of dollars for any of these works individually, and you can see that there's a collection of quite major components all put together. I don't think there's an option out there that could avoid that for the scale of the change that the project's seeking to achieve.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Are there any further questions amongst us?
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if it's a question for the officer or a question for the Mayor, but I know that the National Party has put out many statements saying, there's an urgent need for a harbour crossing. Are we aware of what their exact policy on this is? Has the Mayor spoken to the new government about crossings?
I'm unaware of, I know that they've stamped on the Auckland Light Rail, which I felt had some little bits of merit left, but I haven't heard what they're intending to do on this one here. I have heard the Prime Minister state, and before he was elected, that he thought that tunnels were the answer, but I don't think it's his strong suit.
I take from that the Mayor has not had a discussion around this issue. Councillor Darby?
Yeah, it was just, thanks Chair and thanks Mayor. They do have a policy that needs to start by the end of this decade somehow. So,
Councillor Darby?
Thank you. Just in terms of the recommendations, and I'll just scroll up, the lower cost options not being pursued. I can't find the exact words. Can you just, Elise or Daniel, could you just expand on that? What were these lower cost options that possibly weren't followed up on in preference for this recommended outcome? What are you referring to?
One of the reasons, as the Mayor's pointed out, is that it's a large project in part because it's trying to achieve all things for all people, and so it's got significant resilience and public transport and active mode and sea level rise, a whole range of things, which all had to be addressed through the project. So you ended up with a huge project. The lower cost options typically only addressed some of those issues, and so therefore they got discounted. So I think what we're trying to do now is say, well, let's bring into the mix how well a lower cost option addressed partially the solution and have a discussion about trade-offs. So a lot of the things that have been talked about were previously assessed, but they were kind of discarded because they didn't do enough. And so now we're trying to put together some of those cheaper options to see if we can get 80% of the way. That might be enough, given the challenge we've got with affordability.
That's, I noticed the paragraph in your report, you're referring to the alternative that is the alternative solution that is going to form part of the IBC, which the Whakakatahi Board is going to be viewing in, I think, the new year, isn't it? So does Auckland Transport have visibility over that at a technical level and then at a governance level?
I'm just going to interrupt at this point. At a governance level, Councillor Darby, you are a director. So at a board level, it's understood that you would understand that, but on the earlier part to your question, it would be helpful for response from AT.
I'm sitting here as a councillor. I'm not an AT board member sitting here. My question stands.
We are involved in the development and the assessment of the lower cost alternatives. That is being done very quickly because it's there's been about a year spent on the IBC. The lower cost work has only started recently, pulling that together, and it has to be completed in time to give to the February Wakakatahi board. So clearly there's less detail as part of that. So we're trying to work closely with the team to contribute to that and make sure our concerns about affordability and whole of life cost are included. The intention, I'm intending to get that information to our AT board, which has a subcommittee in early February. And so it's a bit of a heroic effort to try to get that in front of the board for AT, so at least they are aware of that before Wakakatahi meets, their board meets, and there'd be able to be a position put forward on behalf of AT about their views on that. But I just would acknowledge it's very quickly put together information. It will necessarily be quite light and won't be nearly to the level of detail and rigour that the large recommended option has had. So it may well not answer all of the questions that we might have.
My apologies. That concludes the questions that I asked the officers to withdraw. The matter is moved and seconded, and the first speaker is Mayor Brown.
Okay, thank you, Member Brown, for bits and pieces you raised, but earlier today we heard that from the guys on the Harbour Bridge that they valued the Harbour Bridge at $3 billion, which is a lot less than $30 billion for the crossing. In fact, it's a tenth of it. To put $56 billion into context, every house on the North Shore, adding them together and buying the houses themselves would cost you $100 billion. So you're going to spend 60% of the value of the houses you're serving on a way to get there, which seemed to be a bit out of context. This should have been a question, I suppose. One of the things missing is demand management. Before you do crossings, we heard that this morning, you know, how much more can we get out of the Harbour Bridge with demand management, with perhaps encouraging trucks to be there at night. There's a whole lot of things before we even need to have this. So I'm sorry they've gone now. I can't ask if there's demand management, but demand management doesn't show up anywhere here either. It doesn't sound as though even our staff considered that. Without that, they came up with 10 reasons of why we shouldn't support it. So I'm quite happy not to support it, but I just want you to get that feeling about this. That I'm not denigrating those who got in a room and came up with it, but we did hear that the bridge was worth $3 billion from people who've just got one, who know a bit about it. And we also heard this morning about Auckland Light Rail, young people who showed up and they knew that a kilometre of light rail was $50 million, but the people who the government employed thought it was 470. So we've got catastrophic mispricing in this sector, not just errors and if you're not a technical person in this and you're asked to believe the figures that are given by people, you have no option but to believe those figures, so that well-intentioned members of these things could have been led astray. It wasn't until I knew, for instance, what the cost of light rail fresh in France was that I realised just how wrong the figures we were. It wasn't until we heard today that the bridge cost $3 billion. I kind of always knew they're a hell of a lot cheaper than tunnels, but not that much. So I'll be shocked if we don't vote against this, or vote in favour of this, which is telling them. And the other thing is, every time that Wakakatahi blow another $30 billion, that's a $30 billion less for going on our road repairs. It's a $30 billion less for the safety things that some people want around schools and bits and pieces. We have a small country with a small economy, and we can't allow these big projects to wreck the rest of the country just to solve a localised problem. Thank you for that.
Thank you. The next speaker is Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support the recommendations, though not in detail, and I'll just briefly recount the history of this project going back to the 90s, when the ARC was very much involved in looking at this so-called second harbour crossing. It had a go in the mid-90s, and then it kind of was put on the shelf, and then a much more determined effort around about 2006 to 2008 with Auckland City Council, transport planners, North Shore City, I think it was called Transit New Zealand in those days, that is NZTA, aka Waka Kotahi. And the outcome, there was various trajectories and modes, bridge, tunnel and so on, as you can imagine, and the settled agreement was for a road rail tunnel along the virtually along the alignment of the present Harbour Bridge, and everyone agreed on it, and given it was 2008, it was thought wise to put it on the shelf to the mid-2020s, which seemed a very long time into the future. When Stephen Joyce, the Honourable Stephen Joyce, became the Minister of Transport, he wasn't quite happy with it, so he asked for it to be reviewed. His preference was for another bridge. But after the review, the difference between a bridge and a tunnel was $1 billion, but bridge being cheaper. But all in all, because of the resilience of the tunnel, he decided to leave things alone. What we have now with this effort is probably a process one too many, and it has turned into a complete muddle. So I agree that this is not supportable. I would have to say also, including in regard to the rail road tunnel, which seems to me eminently sensible, there is a complication now, because originally, with the extension of rail to Britomart, there was provision for rail services to go to the North Shore. The CRL, believe it or not, has been designed in a way that there's no lateral connection possible to the North Shore, the way it's currently engineered. So that kind of puts a constraint on heavy rail connection to the North Shore, though I don't believe it's insurmountable. What I would disagree with in the recommendations is there's a whole lot of reasons why this is not good, including the price which the Mayor has talked about, which is completely ridiculous. However, to say that we have no governance role in this, I don't think is necessary. We're being asked, we're the regional authority, of course we have a role in this. We're the builders of the CRL, and we have major public transport and transport responsibilities. We're even talking about a congestion charge cordon in this particular area. So please don't say, oh, it's got nothing to do with us, because that's a feeble excuse. There's plenty of reasons why we should oppose it. I disagree with claiming that we have no governance role whatsoever in this. We actually do, so thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Member Brown.
Thank you. Look, just noting the cost would be over a 50-year period. We're certainly not going to write a cheque for $50 billion tomorrow. And the plan does include demand management. Is there any support for the preferred option if the cost was taken out of the equation?
We're in debate at this point, so it's not, you can ask that in a general sense, but you can't direct, the only person you can direct it to is me, and I can't answer that on behalf of everyone here. But you've made an important point. There are no further speakers. Oh, Councillor Darby.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, for moving this and supporting those motions. I think it is important. Look, I hope this doesn't sound too sort of harsh going towards Wakakatahi. You know, they are our partners, and we've just got we've got some questions about this, and maybe it's, you know, we got to keep working at this one. There are some challenges, but you know, reiterating the point of $56 billion, you know, it's an enormous number, and it comes with a really low BCR too. Mayor, yesterday you talked about in your proposal about, you know, BCRs and not entertaining things that come in under, I think it was 1.1 you were saying. Yeah. I mean, the benefits are really struggling to outweigh the costs on this project as it currently sits. They're not really coming anywhere near it, to be honest. Maybe if this project was chunked up, and it is in two parts, but of course the part that interests me most is that public transport light rail component, which comes after the big road spend. And that's 10 general traffic lanes. That is not a climate future solution. It is not anywhere near it. That belongs in a different century. And I just cannot imagine 10 general traffic lanes crossing under, over, around that harbour in the future. I can envisage some very new and well patronised active connections for pedestrians and cyclists and rapid transit, and to also take care of the freight responsibility that we have as well. That's the future that I see. And I look forward to the lower cost alternatives that Wakakatahi and others are working up to go to the Wakakatahi board in February, and support these motions before us.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson, and that is the last speaker.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'll be brief. I just wanted to support Mayor Brown's korero, which I thought was really, really good. Something that I've been questioning a long time, this project and its spend. Frankly, you only spend $1 once, right? And if you want to test the value of your spend, you pick up that price and then you compare it against, if you were to invest that kind of money across the rest of the city, including the North Shore, what would you get for that? So you would definitely get some lower cost alternatives for the North Shore, but you'd also get all manner of bus and train networks that is desperately needed across the entire city. You may even get Mayor Robbie's rapid rail for that. So, you know, you can only spend $1 once, and for that reason it's far too expensive, and so I'm out.
Thank you. I'm just checking as to whether the Mayor wants to exercise his right of reply as the mover of this.
Cool, just go for it.
On that basis, I will put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary say no. Thank you. That is passed.
Can we record that unanimously then, please, if it's unanimous? Oh, there we go.
Member Brown?
Could I just abstain, please, because of conflict?
I was remiss, I didn't call for abstentions. Abstentions? Thank you, Member Brown. That concludes that. We now have the regular update from